We are back with Dr. Steve Graef with Ask Dr. Steve for our Athlete Strong for Mental Health. My name is Dan Mucci, and I'm the Mission Advancement Director here at CNA. Today, we are going to examine the topic of multiple sport athletes. So in recent years, a lot of coaches have discouraged their athletes from playing more than one sport. But some recent studies in the last year or two have shown it might be better for athletes to participate in more than one sport because the wear and tear on their bodies and getting more close competition allows them to feel more comfortable in pressure situations. So we'll look at that with handling some of the stress and anxiety that goes along with playing two sports. And of course, as we move into discussions, Steve, some sports just go together, like cross country and track go together. So it's natural that some of those athletes would play two sports. Sometimes football and wrestling or football and track go together, to name a few. So we'll look at that. And as usual, we'll break it down into a segment on coaches, a segment on athletes, and a segment for the parents. So welcome back, Dr. Steve. Do you have anything you want to say to our viewers out there before we get started?
No, hopefully everybody's out there is happy and healthy and managing things pretty well. So looking forward to another great conversation as well today.
Great. Let's transition to the athletes. So we've, as I said, we've talked about the coaches. Obviously, playing two sports requires a lot of time management skills. And, as I mentioned, I said my son played 3 sports in high school. A lot of times, summer practices conflicted. And so what is the best way for the athlete to kind of communicate his schedule to a coach? I know so much today is done technology-wise, like we'll just send a quick text to the coach. But do you really feel like texting is the best way, or they should just sit down with their coach and have an honest conversation, like this is what the schedule looks like? How do you think the athlete should handle that?
Well, yes to all, of course, right? I think this is one of those upstream things where a coach needs to be mindful of and deliberate about how does he or she want his athletes or her athletes to communicate with them. And those are things that should happen at the beginning of the season, really. Like when I was at Ohio State, we had meetings before we even stepped foot on the practice field, multiple meetings about the dotting I's and crossing T's and the X's and O's of how we're going to manage some of the logistics of being an athlete here. And I think though high school coaches, it's a different level. I think that can still go a long way. Like, what are the expectations? If you all need to communicate with me, how should that happen? Should that happen through text? Should that happen in person? So coaches do have a responsibility of setting that out. If a coach did not, I think it's however the athlete feels most comfortable communicating could be a good start as well. In person is always a great approach. An in-person discussion is going to build social skills beyond that of any other. And that skill is going to come in handy later on too. So I think the biggest thing is do not feel held back to be able to do that. I think being able to have that conversation about I'm interested in participating in another sport, what should I think through? That should be something an athlete is able to do with a coach.
Yeah, and so again, we're just going to fall back on my son because that's my personal reference. And in the summer, he really tried to be fair. He'd look across a week and see, like, if, let's say, basketball and baseball conflicted, he would tell his coach, on Tuesday, I'm going to miss basketball because I have baseball, but on Thursday, I'm going to miss baseball to be in basketball. And so he really kind of took it upon himself to do a lot of that communication, which was good. So do you think athletes should try to look at it and maybe handle it fairly like that by letting a coach know, like, hey, I know I'm going to miss here, but later in the week, I'm going to miss this sport to be with you. So it's kind of balancing itself out a little bit.
I think that's ideal. Like that is such a responsible and evolved way of managing this situation. You're the one who wants to participate in multiple sports, right? Like,
right.
So it is kind of on the athlete. I mean, I know we talked about a culture of multi-sport and how to manage that. But it's ultimately on the athlete. I mean, the athlete's the individual who is interested in playing multiple sports. So I think they should own a little bit of responsibility of communicating to both coaches, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I'm open to feedback. This isn't written in stone. It seems fair to me, but also I want to be able to run this by you two to get a nice compromise.
Right, because maybe basketball needs you more the day you were going to be off than baseball. So maybe you can flip it, or whatever the two sports are that are conflicting.
Correct. And if it's, yeah, in the case of baseball or softball, if it's batting practice, maybe you could do batting practice kind of any time, but these sprint workouts for track only happen at this particular time. So, there's different ways of slicing that out.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the coach looking at the athlete's mental and physical aspect. What should the athlete themselves be aware of? Because a male or female 17, 18-year-old thinks they can do it all, like they've got the stamina to do everything. So what should they themselves be starting to kind of zoom in on or key in on?
Yeah, just know thyself, right? I mean, we're not always the most self-aware as adolescents, but
Or
if you
adults.
or as adults, yeah, for that matter. I mean, trust me, I don't have it all figured out either. Um, and so just knowing, man, if you're feeling a little bit off your game, that can be just a really good red flag of, maybe I need to take a day to relax a little bit more and recharge the battery. I just don't have as much pep in my step, or I'm feeling a little bit more sore than I used to, or mentally, I just don't feel as motivated or as focused to really do this workout today or participate in this practice. Those things can seem subtle sometimes, but they can be nice little warning shots that you might be overdoing it. And you know what? If you're feeling good and you're fine, fine. Again, like that's not an impossible thing. Just because you're participating in multiple sports doesn't mean that it's going to automatically lead to burnout, stress, and anxiety. But just be aware of that potential, and maybe do a little mental, physical, emotional scan of yourself prior to each week. It's just a little check-in. Hey, how am I doing? I need a little bit more rest, or I'm feeling pretty good. Am I eating enough? Am I sleeping good? Am I still hanging out with friends and communicating with my family? Just a little check-in, I think, can go a long way to know thyself.
And then again, if they are having an off day, that's really the time to also communicate that to the coach. Like, hey, I probably just need a mental health day today, or I'm going to go a little bit later and work out or practice because I'm just not 100% there.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Again, you want to be mindful of, if you're every day, maybe you don't like the sport as much as you thought you did, and every day is turning into a mental health day. Well, I just can't go that hard
Yeah,
today. I mean, as a senior at Lake,
right.
I didn't want to go to practice, it was
Oh,
after school, and I mean, I loved football. I loved being around my teammates and stuff, but like Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice. I mean, there's some days I really enjoyed it, and other days it's kind of a drag, midway through the fall and
right.
you're in school and stuff. So did that warrant a mental health day? No, it was just me needing to motivate myself to go and practice and be a good team member. So those are things that I think are really important for us to balance out too, as an athlete.
And so here's probably the biggest, I wouldn't say elephant in the room, but here's a great question. So what advice do you give athletes who are dealing with multiple coaching personalities? And again, when we're in the summer workouts, perhaps you're dealing with those personalities all in the same day. So how does that wear a little bit mentally on the kid? And then, the further you go down your day, you're going to get drained. So how do you kind of prep yourself not to just fire back at the coach for, something minor and make it a bigger issue than what it really is?
Yeah. Well, get used to it, because that is life, right? I mean, and they already do it in
Right.
the classroom. They have some teachers that they really jive with, and other teachers that are like, gosh, this person's so tough, or they don't teach very well. And then same thing as you go into life, right? You encounter neighbors, some neighbors you like, some neighbors you don't get along with, coworkers. Oh, I love this coworker, but this coworker is a drag. This boss is cool, but this one is a drag. So that's going to be a part of life, figuring out how to navigate different types of personalities. So I think the more that the athletes can just be aware of, not everyone is going to be like the cheerleader type. There's going to be tough coaches. There's going to be coaches that don't seem to like care as much about you outside of the performance realm. That's those people are going to pop up, and then there's going to be coaches that you're going to want to invite to your wedding someday. So there's going to be all of that. So I think just being aware of that fact, kind of normalizing that there's these different personalities that emerge, and to kind of put up a little bit of a force field, particularly with the ones that you're not kind of working well with, to just not let their coaching style negatively impact you. It's like when I go to a Spanish speaking country, the fact that they're speaking Spanish doesn't take away the fact that I know English. I just have to learn how to speak Spanish with this person. And so I think the same thing can apply with an athlete with a tough coach or a coach they don't get along with. They're not necessarily speaking the language that works with you, but that doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily wrong with you, or that you don't know what you're doing, or that the coach doesn't even not like you. It's just that might be their personality style. So that would be some tips I would offer an athlete there.
All right. And before we leave the athletic part of this and move into the parental aspect of it, anything else you want to give advice to the athlete on who's playing multiple sports?
Yeah, I think good for you. Good for you. I think it's a great opportunity to put new skills into that athlete toolbox. And then if you ever decide that you no longer want to participate in multiple sports, like that's cool too. Like the world is your oyster. I would also say, to be a bit more mindful about the level of commitment that you'll have to a sport. Like it's okay to try something out and be curious about something. But if you get into a sport and then you find that you don't necessarily like it, and then you quit or move on like halfway into the season, okay, like you can do that, but try to think through a little bit ahead of time. All right, is this a sport that I think that I'll ultimately want to see the season through? What are some of the pros and cons associated with this? If my best friend decides not to play, so that way you can commit to the entirety of the season, rather than leaving maybe your team out to dry a bit. There are times when you need to do that, but we would want to avoid the situation where I'm going to try this out for a couple weeks and then okay, it's not working out, so I'm done. Being more deliberate about that.